In the 1980s, Ed Wood's movie, Plan 9 from Outer Space, started to become known as the worst movie ever made, which made it too convenient to call Ed the worst director of all time. If anyone thinks Plan 9 is the worst movie they've ever seen because some tombstones tip over, they need to watch more movies. I met Conrad Brooks in 2005. One of his items for sale? Plan 9 coffee. Conrad was part of Ed's inner circle. He told me what most of us already guessed. Ed's problem was that he could never get a budget large enough to film his vision. No, to find the worst movie ever made, you could start with Ed's own Glen or Glenda, a confusing mess that goes back and forth between being a movie and a documentary. It features Bela Lugosi towards the end of his career, heavy narration by Timothy Farrell, strange uses of stock footage, and surrealism. Glen or Glenda is like something that came out of a blender, but its message comes across clearly. Released in 1953, it shows that Ed was decades ahead of his time since it deals with transvestites, gender, and how society treats people struggling with their identity. If you watch it today, you realize Ed was a pioneer of trans issues. Glen or Glenda is also the most personal movie Ed made since he, in his personal life, did wear women's clothing. Here's how screenwriters Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski showed Ed breaking the news to producer George Weiss in the 1994 movie Ed Wood, directed by Tim Burton.
Mr. Weiss, I have never told anyone what I'm about to tell you, but I really want this job. I like to dress in women's clothing.
You a fruit?
No, not at all. I love women. Wearing their clothes makes me feel closer to them.
Roger Ebert said the greatest props an actor can use are cigarettes and hats. I'd like to add the sandwich Mike Starr uses to the list. An early scene in Glen or Glenda shows a transvestite who has committed suicide, a scene that could have come from the news today.
Let me see that note.
I was put in jail recently. Why? Because I, a man, was caught on the street wearing women's clothing. This was my 4th arrest for the same act. In life, I must continue wearing them. Therefore, it would only be a matter of time until my next arrest. This is the only way. Let my body rest in death forever in the things I cannot wear in life.
Let my body rest in death forever in the things I cannot wear in life. You might want to rethink Ed as the worst filmmaker of all time. Ed must have thought he had to educate people who saw his movie because a lot of the dialogue is pure psychobabble.
Let's get our story straight. You're referring to the suicide of the transvestite?
If that's the word you men of medical science use for a man who wears woman's clothing, yes.
Yes, in cold, technical language, that's the word. As unfriendly and as vicious as it may sound. However, in actuality, it's not an unfriendly word, nor is it vicious when you know the people to whom it pertains.
Glen or Glenda was made over 70 years ago, and I wonder if Ed dreamed of an America of the future that shared his vision of acceptance.
Since Trump has gotten into office, I learned how much words matter.
Well, now that the pigs are out of the tunnel, we see who they are. Like that's what.
That's I've never heard it like that, but yes, you are right. I thought that we were through.
No, because I've said this before, but it's like the one thing that he got rid of was the one thing that democracy requires is tolerance. Tolerance is necessary in order for it to function properly. So that monster gets in there and says, "You don't have to tolerate shit with these people."
Straight pride and like hetero as heck.
Kid Rock wanted to make a statement against the makers of Bud Light after they supported a trans person. Rock, apparently unable to express himself using words the way an adult would, turned to shooting cans of beer.
This, I don't know what's going on with this Bud Light thing. I do think it's interesting. You know, when you get somebody like, Kid Rock bumper hitching onto the hate machine for a little anger juice to try to grab a bit of quickly fleeting relevance, like he gives a shit.
Most people would probably describe themselves as tolerant, But have you ever noticed how tolerant everyone is until it comes time to tolerate something they don't like?
Where's the straight section for straight kids?
Indoctrination of kids.
Target's decision to pull some of their Pride merchandise following anti-LGBTQ+ backlash is being criticized as another example of a corporation bowing to conservative pressure and demonstrating selective pride. After criticism over their LGBTQ+ Pride collection led to complaints, vandalism, and even bomb threats.
A march with a message echoing through the streets of San Francisco. Activists and their allies say enough is enough.
Trans rights are human rights.
Organizers say this protest march, called Drag Up, Fight Back, is in direct response to a wave of anti-LGBTQ legislation nationwide, targeting the trans and drag communities.
If only we could go back to a simpler time when children weren't indoctrinated into the woke hive of gender issues. Let's take 1972. The actress Marlo Thomas wanted to teach her young niece that she didn't have to fall into stereotypes about gender. Marlo, daughter of Danny Thomas, broke the glass ceiling when she gathered up some friends and released an album named Free to Be You and Me. It was a passion project for Marlo. One of her celebrity friends, Alan Alda, performed a song named William Wants a Doll based on a book of the same name released in 1972.
Can I please have a doll now?
Said my friend Bill. A doll, a doll. William wants a doll.
They really give it to William in the song. And William turns out okay. And life moved on after Free to Be You and Me was released. In fact, I bet most of you have never heard of it. I never thought Ed Wood was the worst director of all time, but I did think Glen or Glenda was his worst movie.
Worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better.
And, technically, it probably is. But I watched it a few weeks ago and was shocked how its message speaks to exactly what politicians today are arguing about and what trans people are being murdered over. I'll let Ed have the last word with this conversation from Glen or Glenda.
Say, did you read about the guy that changed to a girl? Says he was perfectly normal, too.
How can a guy be normal and go and do a thing like that to himself?
All the same, it must take a lot of guts to pull a stunt like that.
That's a problem I don't ever intend to face.
Maybe it's a problem we should all face.
I don't get you.
Just think of the unhappy life. The miserable time this world of ours must have given that poor guy.
I still don't get you.
Now, here is a guy who wanted to be a girl. Supposing there had been no way to change.
You sound as if you're really head up on this thing.
I guess I am.
Do you realize what would happen if every man in the country that wanted to wear women's clothes or felt like a woman went to their doctors and wanted to change?
Of course. That's why I say perhaps society should be a little bit more lenient with them. Maybe society should try to understand them as human beings.
Ed wasn't dealt the best hand in life. He drank heavily before dying in 1978. Check out Glen or Glenda and celebrate that he was ahead of his time.